This is Our Lady of Guadalupe. This is Our Lady of Aparecida. This one, Lourdes. This one, Fatima. 4 names. 4 faces. 4 countries. 4 stories with nothing to do with one another. And then comes the question almost everyone has heard, and that few people can answer without stumbling. If there is only one Mary, why are there so many Our Ladies? Are there several of them? Did the Church invent a few along the way? Some people ask this out of curiosity, others out of suspicion. Either way, the question deserves a better answer than it's all the same thing. Because the answer exists, it is ancient, and it has rules. There are exactly 4 paths by which a title of Our Lady is born. In this video you will see what the Church actually teaches about venerating Mary, and you will see the strongest objection to that teaching, spelled out in full. You will see the 4 paths by which a Marian title is born, and 5 stories examined up close, with the documents and with the counter case of those who doubted. And you will see how the Church decides whether or not to believe in apparition, a rule that changed in 2024 and that almost nobody noticed. This is Better Catholic. If you like faith told with the sources on the table, no sensationalism and no padding, subscribe to the channel. Let's start at the beginning, because this is where almost all the confusion is born. Look closely at this face. It was painted in Constantinople 900 years ago, long before Mexico, Brazil or Portugal existed on the map of the faith. And you will meet it again, almost unchanged, everywhere in this story. The Church has a reference text on this, Chapter 8 of Lumen Gentium, from the Second Vatican Council, 1964. Hold on to the name of that document, we come back to it at the end. Titles are usually grouped into 4 families. The relational ones, like Mother of God and Mother of the Church. The virtue ones, like Our Lady of Sorrows. The apparition ones, like Lourdes and Fatima. And the geographical and cultural ones, like Czestochowa and Knock. Each of those names was born in a different place, a different language and a different hardship. The title is the local doorway, and what stands on the other side of it is what we came here to find out. But that still doesn't answer the question that really bothers people, which is this one: isn't praying to her the same as worshipping her? The technical distinction comes from the 13th century, from the Summa Theologiae of Thomas Aquinas, in the 3rd part, question 25, article 5. Latria is the adoration owed to God alone. Mary, being a creature, cannot receive latria. She receives hyperdulia, an elevated veneration, distinct from the ordinary dulia owed to the saints, and infinitely distinct from adoration. Now, the serious criticism, and it does exist. At the Second Council of Nicaea, in 787, the Greek words proskinesis, reverence, and latreia, adoration, were both translated into Latin by the same verb, adurare. The ambiguity is real and it is there in the documents. And Larry Sanger, one of the founders of Wikipedia, pushes the argument all the way: if Mary is the Mother of God, Queen of Heaven, and receives hyperdulia, then the Catholic would in practice be treating her as the equivalent of God. And the honest answer comes in 2 parts. On the level of formal doctrine, the distinction is ancient and actively policed. On the level of popular practice, mass devotion sometimes crosses the line the Catechism draws, and that is exactly why the document Marialis Cultus, of Paul VI, in 1974, orders the elimination of every manifestation of worship contrary to correct Catholic practice. The Church correcting itself in writing. One single Mary, then. But that makes the question stranger, not simpler. If she is only one, where do hundreds of names come from? Here is the spine of this video, and it is the most useful thing you will take away from it. There are 4 different institutional paths by which a title of Our Lady is born. Each one with its own process and its own vocabulary of approval. And almost all the confusion comes from collapsing the 4 into one. Path number 1, the apparition with a seer and a message. Someone with a first and a last name says they saw and heard. There is a reported dialogue. The case goes through the discernment of the bishop of the diocese. Lourdes, Fatima, La Salette, Rue du Bac and Knock belong here. Path number 2, the image. There is no seer. There is no message. There is no dialogue. An image is found, carved or handed down by ancient tradition, and local miracles come to be attributed to it. Decades or centuries later, the Church recognizes the devotion that is already established, with a canonical coronation and, sometimes, a decree of patronage. Aparecida belongs here. Czestochowa and Lujan too. Path number 3, the dogma. This one does not speak of where she appeared, but of who she is. It is born of a council or of a papal bull. Theotokos, the one who bore God, was defined at the Council of Ephesus, in 431, against the Christology of Nestorius. The Immaculate Conception, by the bull Ineffabilis Deus, of Pius IX, in 1854. The Assumption, by Pius XII, in 1950. Path number 4, the religious order. A religious family adopts Mary under a title tied to its own spirituality and spreads that title across the world through its own members. Mount Carmel, the Rosary, and Perpetual Help belong here. And there is one case that doesn't quite fit in any single box, because it sits between two of them, and that is where we are going to start. Mexico, December of 1531. 10 years after the fall of Tenochtitlan. According to the account, an indigenous man named Juan Diego, an ordinary farmer, a widower, in his 50s, was crossing Tepeyac Hill when he heard singing, and met a young woman who identified herself as the ever-Virgin Mary, Mother of the True God. She asked that a temple be raised there. The bishop-elect, the Franciscan Juan de Zumarraga, listened and did not believe. He asked for a sign. And here is the scene the whole world knows. According to the traditional chronology, on the 12th of December, Juan Diego climbed to the top of the hill, a barren place, and found Castilian roses in bloom, which are not native to Mexico. He carried the roses inside his tilma, the fiber cloak he wore. In front of the bishop, he opened the cloak, the roses fell to the floor and, on the fabric, the image was imprinted. The most quoted line of the whole episode, spoken to Juan Diego when he wanted to give up, is inscribed today above the main entrance of the basilica, "Am I not here, I who am your mother?" Now the care this channel does not skip. That narrative, day by day, comes from a text called Nakan Mapua, written in classical Nahuatl. And its authorship and its date are the object of a real historical dispute that is not settled. One position attributes the text to Antonio Valeriano, around 1556, the critical edition by Souza, Poole and Lockhart, of 1998, holds that it was composed in 1649. The oldest surviving printed copy is from 1649. 118 years after the event. And there is a documentary silence that historians take seriously. Between 1531 and 1556 there is no known mention of Juan Diego or of the apparition. Not even in the will of Bishop Zumarraga himself. There were two serious material examinations in the 20th century, and they reach opposite conclusions. Philip Callahan, in 1981, with infrared photography. And José Sol Rosales, in 1982, with microscopic examination, commissioned by the abbot of the basilica himself. And the two conclusions are still standing, one against the other, to this day. Both reports in full, with what each one measured, who contested whom, and the NASA story that never happened, are in the book, in a chapter devoted to nothing else. Here I leave the question standing, which is where it stands. And it is only fair to say what the Church actually declared. On the 31st of July, 2002, John Paul II canonized Juan Diego, the first indigenous American to be canonized. But notice what that is and what it is not. It is an act about the holiness of a man's life. It is not a dating verdict on a manuscript, nor a statement about the material composition of the cloth. Guadalupe has a seer and it has a message, like Path 1, and an image of disputed origin, like Path 2, it is the hybrid case. Now a case that is Path 2 in its pure form, and it is in Brazil. The Paraíba Valley, in São Paulo. According to tradition, October of 1717. And I have to stop right at the date, because it is a good example of the care that separates research from an internet summary. The oldest known document about the episode is the account of Father José Alves Valila, recorded in 1743, in the parish register of Guaratingueta. And it does not say 1717. It says, and I quote, in the year of 1719, more or less. The date of 1717, universal today, is a tradition consolidated by much later historiography. It is not a certainty of the oldest source. The governor of the captaincy was passing through the village and the people wanted to honor him with a banquet. The fishermen went to the river out of season, Domingos Garcia, Zoan Alves, and Felipe Pedroso, and they fished 6 kilometers of river without taking anything. When they were about to give up, Zoan Alves cast the net one more time and pulled up the body of a statue, with no head. He cast it again, a little further down, and pulled up the head. From that point on the catch was so abundant that the canoes almost sank under the weight. And, in the traditional reading, that is the miracle of the catch, what came after the finding, not the finding itself. Notice what did not happen here. There was no seer. Nobody saw Our Lady. There was no message, there was no dialogue, there was no request. That is why Aparecida is not, technically, an apparition. It never went through a process of discernment, neither back then nor today. Her institutional path was a different one: canonical coronation of the statue in 1904, and the decree of patronage, signed by Pius XI in 1930, declaring the Virgin, under the title of Aparecida, principal patroness of all Brazil. And here is one that almost every Brazilian gets wrong. The law that makes the 12th of October a national holiday is from 1980, and it did not create the patronage, it declares a civil holiday, treating the title of patroness as something that had already existed for 50 years. The Church proclaims the patronage, the state declares the holiday, and popular memory melts the two into a single event. And then there is the color. Many people read the dark color of the statue as a theological meaning present from the start. Except that the experts confirm that the original polychrome was light. Today's color is the result of centuries of soot from candles and oil lamps, on top of the years submerged in the river. The symbolic reading that devotion gave to that color came afterwards. And the scale of the thing today, in 2024 the National Shrine recorded more than 9 million pilgrims. Official figure, not an estimate. A statue with no message became the largest religious movement in Brazil. Without anyone ever having heard a single word. What the parish register of 1743 says, line by line, and what the experts found underneath the paint, are in the book. Now the exact opposite, the case in which a 14-year-old girl heard a sentence she did not understand, and that sentence changed everything. France, the 11th of February, 1858. Bernadette Soubirous was 14 years old and stood about 4'7". She had chronic, severe asthma, spoke almost only Occitan, the dialect of the region, and could barely read or write. The family lived in a single room that had been a decommissioned prison cell, given to them free out of charity. She had gone out to gather firewood near a grotto called Massabielle. She heard a sound of wind, nothing moved around her, and she saw a light and a white figure. And here is something important. Bernadette did not say she had seen Our Lady. She never used that word at the start. She called the figure, in Occitan, Acaro. Which means, simply, that thing. There were 18 apparitions in all, from February to July. And what can be measured in this case is the crowd. On the 19th of February, 8 people. On the 28th, more than 1,000. On the 4th of March, more than 9,000. The apparatus of the state treated the case as a police matter. The mayor ordered the grotto fenced off and fined anyone who came near. And the church, at that moment, stayed out of it. The bishop instructed the parish priest of that very town not to go to the grotto. The one who ordered the site reopened to the public, in October of 1858, was the Emperor Napoleon III, by direct order. On the 25th of February, the figure told Bernadette to drink and to wash in a spring that did not exist. She dug the earth with her hand, found mud, threw it away 3 times, and on the 4th she managed to drink. The next day the water was running clear. That is the origin of the Spring of Lourdes, a hole dug by hand by a 14-year-old girl. And the name came only at the 16th apparition, on the 25th of March, on the Solemnity of the Annunciation, in Gascon Occitan. Keh soi era Immaculata Concepcio. That is, I am the Immaculate Conception. Bernadette had no idea what that meant. She repeated the sentence the whole way back just so she would not forget it, and went to hand it over to the parish priest. The dogma had been proclaimed 4 years earlier. On the 18th of January, 1862, the Bishop of Tarbes approved the case, with a formula carved in marble in the basilica, that the apparition bears all the marks of truth. And this is where Lourdes separates itself from all the others, because it is the only shrine in the world with a formal, permanent medical mechanism for examining cures, born in 1883 and reinforced by order of Pius X, operating under entirely medical supervision, not ecclesiastical. Since 1858, around 7,500 people have come to the medical office asking for confirmation of a cure. Of those, 70 have been declared scientifically inexplicable. 7,570. And the medical committee cannot declare a miracle. It can only say inexplicable in the light of current scientific knowledge. The one who declares is the bishop, in consultation with Rome. About the water, which is the most commercially exploited subject in the world, it is worth hearing Bernadette herself: one must have faith and pray, the water will have no virtue without faith. Lourdes is the most examined apparition in history, and the entire medical file, what the office accepts, what it refuses, and why, is a chapter of the book. Here I leave the two numbers standing, side by side. Because the case that marked the 20th century most had something Lourdes never had, an entire crowd looking at the sky at the same time. Portugal, the 13th of May, 1917. Europe was in the middle of the First World War. 3 children were pasturing sheep at the Cova de Iria, Lucia dos Santos, 9 going on 10, Francisco Marto, 7 going on 8, and Jacinta Marto, 6 going on 7. They reported 6 monthly apparitions, always on the 13th, of a lady brighter than the sun. And the setting was not friendly. Portugal was living under a newly installed republic, with laws separating church and state, and the Republican press treated the case with mockery. In August, the local administrator, hostile to the apparitions, went so far as to arrest the 3 children on the eve of the 13th and to interrogate them in order to pull out the content of the secret they said they were keeping. They were children of 6, 8 and 10. They did not tell. And then comes the 13th of October. And then comes the 13th of October. The crowd at the Cova de Iria is estimated at between 30 and 100,000 people. And I say estimated on purpose, there was no head count, and that range reflects different counting methods. Anyone who gives you an exact number is inventing precision. According to the account, the lady identified herself by saying, "I am the Lady of the Rosary." And then came the episode that became known as the Miracle of the Sun. The best witness that exists for that day is a hostile one. Avelino de Almeida was the correspondent of the Republican newspaper O Seculo, and he was a Freemason. He wrote, 2 days later. The sun trembled, the sun made abrupt movements never seen before, outside all cosmic laws. The sun danced, in the typical expression of the country people. Notice that he attributes the word dance to the language of the country people, not to his own interpretation. And 2 weeks later he wrote the most honest sentence in the whole literature on the subject. A miracle, as the people shout. A natural phenomenon, as the learned say. I do not care to know that now. The rest belongs to science and to the church. And that is exactly how this channel treats the case. What is well established is this: there was an enormous crowd, and there is a rare body of documentation, with more than 150 depositions gathered in 3 independent layers. The most rigorous check available estimates that between 80 and 95% of those present reported seeing some unusual visual phenomenon. What is in dispute are the naturalistic explanations: retinal afterimage, Sahara dust. Each one explains a piece and trips over another. And what is myth we throw out on the spot: the sun did not leave its orbit, no observatory anywhere on the planet recorded a solar anomaly that day. The full confrontation, hypothesis by hypothesis, with what each author proposed and where each one gets stuck, is in the book, with the sources on the table. Here I prefer to stop exactly where the Freemason journalist who was there stopped. The rest belongs to science and to the church. Guadalupe, Aparecida, Lourdes, Fátima. In all of them someone saw, or someone found, or someone heard. Now, the strangest of them all, the one in which nobody heard anything at all. Ireland, the 21st of August, 1879. A poor village in County Mayo, in the middle of a new famine, under torrential rain. 15 people, between 5 and 75 years old, said they had seen the same scene, at the same time, on the outside wall of the church sacristy. Mary at the center, Saint Joseph on the right, a third figure dressed as a bishop on the left, and, further back, an altar with a lamb standing on it. They stayed there for almost 2 hours, praying the rosary in the rain. And none of the figures spoke. Not one word, to any witness, at any moment. No message, no request, no secret. Knock is the only great Marian apparition that is silent. The church opened a commission in October of that year, took the testimony of the witnesses one by one, and concluded that the testimony, taken as a whole, was trustworthy and satisfactory. And again we have to be exact, that formula is not a declaration that the event was supernatural. It is a verdict about the credibility of the people and about the absence of fraud. Nothing more, nothing less. The depositions gathered in 1879 are in the book, in full, one by one, and it is by reading all 15 that the thing gets genuinely strange. 5 stories, 5 paths. But none of them explains where the other titles come from, and they are the overwhelming majority, because most of the Our Ladies never had any apparition at all. Paris, 1830. A 24-year-old novice named Catherine Labouré reported seeing the Virgin standing on a globe, with rays coming out of her hands, inside an oval frame with an inscription in golden letters. O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee. The request was that a medal be struck with that design. The first 1,500 came out in 1832, as cholera was reaching Paris. By the time Catherine died, in 1876, there were already more than 1 billion of them, and she had spent almost 4 decades anonymous, cleaning stables, with almost nobody knowing that she was the seer. The Carmelites have the scapular. Tradition tells that, on the 16th of July, 1251, the Virgin appeared to the Englishman Simon Stock and handed him that piece of cloth. Except that the oldest surviving accounts of his life mention no vision at all, and the first known reference comes from the end of the 14th century. The Dominicans have the rosary. Tradition tells that the Virgin handed it to Dominic de Guzman in 1206. Except that this account appears for the first time with a friar called Alanus de Rupi, preaching around 1470. About 265 years later. And the same pattern in Rome. Legend says that, around the year 352, snow fell in the middle of August on the Esquiline Hill, marking the place where a basilica was to be raised. That is the reason for the name Our Lady of the Snows. Except that the legend only appears in sources after the year 1000, and the basilica that exists was consecrated in 434, to commemorate the Council of Ephesus. Notice what the Church did in all 3 cases. It did not disown the devotion. It kept the devotion and retired the legend. And if you think this is all a thing of past centuries, there is a title that was born practically in front of us. Mary, Undoer of Knots, is a Baroque painting from around 1700, in a church in Augsburg, Germany. Mary unties the knots of a long white ribbon, one angel hands her the tangled ribbon, another gathers up the smooth one. The theological root is far older than the painting. Around the year 180, Saint Irenaeus of Lyon was already writing that the knot of Eve's disobedience was untied by the obedience of Mary. 1,800 years ago. And that devotion was unknown outside Germany until an Argentine bishop named Jorge Mario Bergoglio began to promote it in Buenos Aires, in 1992. The parish gathered around 100 people at Sunday, Massachusetts. 3 years after the enthronement, a newspaper recorded a queue 11 blocks long and around 70,000 people by 8 in the evening. The founding parish priest told the newspaper what is the most honest sentence in this whole piece of research: humanly there is no explanation. To me, there is a particular grace of God, through his mother, who wanted to show herself here. And, to be exact, her feast is local, it is not in the general Roman calendar, there is no medical bureau, there is no verification commission, there is no formally recognized miracle. What exists is a gigantic and documentable devotional phenomenon, which is a different thing from a certified miracle. And it grew from the bottom up, by the faith of ordinary people, not by decree. Rue du Bac, Mount Carmel, the Rosary, the Snows and the whole litany of Loreto have their own chapters in the book, with the documents and the dates I had to leave out here. Which is exactly what brings us to the last question, and to the part almost nobody knows. You have heard the expression apparition approved by the Vatican. I have used that expression my whole life. And it is, technically, incorrect. There is no canonical mechanism by which the Holy See approves an apparition. The one who approves is the bishop of the diocese where the case happened. Every Vatican approval you read about is, in practice, a diocesan approval with indirect recognition from Rome afterwards, a feast entered in the calendar, a coronation, a visit from a pope. And that is why the lists never match. One respected devotional catalog counts 9 approved apparitions, another counts 16. Read carefully, the documentation supports 3 real levels. On the first, diocesan approval plus liturgical inscription by the Holy See, Guadalupe, Rue du Bac, La Salette, Lourdes, Knock and Fátima. On the second, approval by the local bishop only. And on the third, a category that did not even exist until the day before yesterday. Because on the 17th of May, 2024, the rule changed. From 1978 until then, the norms in force had as their main conclusion the declaration that the fact was supernatural, or that it was not. The problem is that this system almost never reached a conclusion. The preamble of the new norms acknowledges in writing that, between 1950 and 2024, only 6 cases were resolved. 6, in 74 years. The new norms replaced that with 6 more cautious conclusions, and they carry one clause that changes the whole game. As a rule, neither the bishop, nor the episcopal conferences, nor the dicastery will declare that these phenomena are of supernatural origin. Not even when the case is cleared. In other words, the ceiling of what the Church is willing to declare has moved. It is not that the cases are worth less, it is that the Church has begun to say more clearly what it can and cannot vouch for. And the first case to test the new rule is the most contested of them all, Medjugorje, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which received authorization for public acts of devotion on the 19th of September, 2024, with no judgment whatsoever about supernaturality, in a case where the local bishop himself rejected the apparitions for decades. So the Church is cautious. Far more cautious than the internet suggests. Which only makes the opening question more interesting: if the Church puts on the brakes this hard, why do the titles never stop being born? And now the answer I promised you at the start. If you put together everything we have seen, a pattern appears, and it is a very simple one. She appears poor to the poor. An indigenous farmer on a hill in Mexico, 10 years after his world had been destroyed. 3 fishermen with no fish on a river in the Paraíba Valley. An asthmatic girl 4'7" tall who lived in a decommissioned prison cell. 3 illiterate children minding sheep in a country at war. 15 Irish villagers in the middle of a famine, standing in the rain. It is not a coincidence of plot. It is the same pattern as the Gospel, and it is the reason these names multiply. Each people, in its own moment of hardship, recognize the same mother in its own language, in its own color, in its own way. Remember Lumen Gentium, that document I asked you to hold on to? Chapter 8 of it organizes everything around one single historical figure. A Marian title is not the name of another person, it is a formula describing a mystery, a place, or a virtue tied to Mary of Nazareth. The Church has never taught that there are several Marys. Not once. That is why there are so many Our Ladies. Not because there are several of them, but because one single person, when she is loved by many different people, ends up with many names. Nobody finds it strange that a grandmother is called 5 different ways by her grandchildren. Guadalupe is the same as Fátima. Aparecida is the same as Lourdes. Knock is the same as the undoer of knocks. One single face, seen from many angles, by many people, across 2,000 years. Meanwhile, the people go on praying. And the titles go on being born. 12.5 million pilgrims at Guadalupe, in December of 2022 alone. 9,057,885 at Aparecida. 6,200,000 at Fátima. 3,100,000 at Lourdes. And an estimate of around 2,000 Marian titles in all, from one single woman. This video is the panorama. It uses roughly 40% of the research, and I had to cut good material in half to make it fit here: the full dispute over the tilma, the Lourdes medical file, the confrontation of the Fatima hypotheses, the 15 depositions of Knock, the whole chapter on Rue du Bac, the one on Mount Carmel and the Rosary, the one on the snows and the Litany of Loreto, the documents in full and the section on sources and method. All of this is in the book Why So Many Marys? One Mother, Many Faces. It is research with primary sources, chapter by chapter, in exactly the way you saw here. The link is pinned in the description of the video. If you want more history of the faith told with the document on the table, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. And tell me down below, which one is your Our Lady? The one your grandmother prayed to, the one from your town, the one you call on when things get hard. Leave her name in the comments. Our Lady, under all your names, pray for us.